Chef Ray class. I'm going to show you how to make an apple pie today. The first thing I'm going to do is prepare my apples. I prepared most of them, but I wanted to show you a couple different techniques of how to do that. Now I have this great little apple peeler core slicer that I'm going to show you how to use. You can get this at any food store, anything that sells like food appliances, Williams-Sonoma. It's pretty inexpensive, and if you're going to do lots of pies or lots of applesauce or something like that, you might want to use this great contraption. So it slices it, it cores it, and peels it all at the same time. So it comes out like this, a little spiral slice. My apple has a little bruise on, so I'm going to cut off that bruise. I don't want any of the interior core in there. I don't want any skin on top. So I'm going to peel that off, and then I'm going to cut it in half. So they're nice half crescents, and they're nice and thin. Another way you can do it if you don't have this contraption, which is wonderful, you can do it by hand, and I just do it with a paring knife. Now, you can never make apple pie with skinned apples. It always has to have the skin removed from the apples. You can also use a peeler. I'm not a fan of peelers because I like to get as much apple as I possibly can, but if you want to do a peeler, you can do that also. Get all your skin off. That skin becomes very leathery, so you never want to use skin for your apple pie. Now here I have a 12-sectioned slicer. It doesn't matter what you use. The 12 section is nice because it gets it nice and thin. So the idea is, if you have a 6 slicer, you want to cut those apples in half, those crescents in half. I want to make sure that there's no little seed holes in my apples, because those are very annoying when you're eating a piece of pie and you're thinking, what is that in there? So you want to kind of feel in the center and make sure there's no seed holes in there. I like a lot of apples in my pie. Who wants an apple pie that only has a very small amount of apples in it? So I've used 8 small apples in my apple pie. You can eat that little skin if you want. It comes off as one continuous piece. Kind of a neat little gadget. Okay, I'm going to prepare this. I did cut up the other apples a little while ago, and you can see they're kind of turning brown, but I did put a little bit of lemon juice on there so they don't turn as brown. And to this I'm going to add a half a cup of sugar. So I'm going to sweeten these up a little bit. Now, it's always a great idea to use a mixed bunch of apples. I like to use a McIntosh or a John Mac. You can use Honeycrisp. If you go to your favorite market, usually they'll have marked on there exactly what they're used for, baking. You want to use a variety because every apple, I'm using 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, every apple breaks down a little bit differently. So if you use, for instance, if you use all McIntosh apples, you're going to have a very soggy apple pie. But if you use it for applesauce, it breaks down very quickly and becomes very liquidy all at once. So I put a half a cup of sugar and I put 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. And now as a thickening agent, I'm going to use 2 tablespoons of flour. Now instead of your flour, you can use cornstarch if you'd like. Some people use tapioca. Anything like that is a thickening agent that we're going to use to help those apples. This is going to absorb some of that water at the bottom of my pie so it doesn't become so soggy. So like I said, I had 8 apples in here, just the little apples. They're a combination of Honeycrisp and Jonathan's. I also like to use Cortland's. Those are all good in apple pie. I like my pie nice and full. So there's how you prepare your apples. I'm going to set those to the side. And now I'm going to prepare my crust. Okay, my crust is 2 cups of flour, which I'm going to get first. My 2 cups of flour. I'm going to use all-purpose flour, not our high gluten flour that we've used in the past. 2 cups of flour. Make sure you're not pounding that down. You're just over scooping and leveling off. There's my oven preheated to 400. I'm going to use shortening. This is Crisco, solid shortening, hydrogenated shortening, which means it has hydrogen in there to keep it solid. You can use a combination. You can use Crisco that's colored yellow if you'd like. It adds a little bit of golden crust to your pie. You can add a little bit of butter to this also. So it's 2/3 of a cup of shortening. Let me put my salt in there first and get that mixed up. My salt is 1 teaspoon of salt. And remember, we said with the salt, it's just for flavor. It's not going to do anything for the tenderness or anything else. It's strictly for flavor. So let me mix that up. And then I'm going to add my shortening. 2/3 of a cup of shortening plus 2 tablespoons. Now at this point I could add 2 tablespoons of butter, which I think I will. I'll add 2 tablespoons of butter just for some color. And I'm just gonna cut that in, just like this. And then I'm gonna use my pastry blender, because with my pastry blender, that is going to coat that shortening with flour. That's what I want to do. I want to take my pastry blender. If you don't have a pastry blender, take 2 knives and you can do this. So I'm just going to mix that in so that all of my shortening has a flour coating around it. And this consistency is just going to be a small crumb. If you've ever seen cornmeal, it should look like cornmeal. Okay, you don't want to do this too much. If it becomes a paste, you've gone way too far with it. So we're cutting in. This is called cutting in. We're cutting this in just to coat our shortening with our flour. Okay, it's nice and crummy. There's no huge chunks in there, and that's what I wanted. All right, my shortening's done, my flour's done, my sugar's done. Now I need my ice cold water. And a fork. All right, on my recipe it says a range of 2 to 3 tablespoons of ice cold water. The reason we're using ice cold water, this even has ice in it. The reason we're using that is because we don't want the shortening and butter to dissolve until it gets into the oven. Then it can dissolve, then it can blister up. So I'm gonna put one in first, not using my ice cubes, of course. And I'm just gonna stir that up gently. Now the way that you're gonna be able to tell is it's gonna kind of gather up. It's very dry in here today. The air conditioner is on. It's very dry, so because it's very dry, I'm gonna probably need to use most of the water. But see how I'm just doing it one at a time? Because you can't reverse this process. If you get it too sticky, adding more flour is just going to make your crust really tough. So I'm gonna need the whole 3 tablespoons. Okay, I'm gonna need more than that because I doubled the recipe from what I had. So I'm gonna need about 5 tablespoons of water. So just follow your recipe that I gave you. So I had half the recipe, so it was 2 to 3. Now it's 4 to 6. All right, it's getting there. I think one more will do it. One more will do it. Now if your dough is sticky, there's no turning back. So what I want to do is gather this up. Squeeze it together. We're not kneading it. We're just kind of gathering it and squeezing it together to see if it's the right consistency. I think this is pretty good. Dump it out on your counter. Gather that up. I don't want to develop those gluten strands because if I develop those gluten strands, I'm going to have a very tough crust. And I want it to be flaky, very nice and flaky. Okay, so my next step, got a lot of supplies here today. My next step is taking my countertop and getting it wet with a wet cloth. And then I'm going to take my saran wrap, set that there for now. I'm going to take my saran wrap and I'm going to put my saran wrap on my countertop. Now I have the big saran. You might have the small saran and need to do 2 strips. I only need to do 1 strip because I have the wide 18-inch saran. I'm going to put a little bit of flour, just a little dusting of flour on top. Going to get my rolling pin out. I'm making a 2-crust pie, so I want to split my dough in half. Usually the larger half will go on the top and the smaller half will go on the bottom. So if you're doing 2 at a time, keep your good one for the top because no one's, or keep your good one for the bottom because no one's going to see it, okay? Keep your nice one for the top. So I am rolling in the middle of my rolling pin. I prefer a rolling pin without sides, without these handles, because I think sometimes We just use these and we really don't get the thinness of the crust that we need. Now here's where you can't panic. You get a little hole in there, no big deal. We're gonna pull it all directions. I'm gonna kind of fix it as I go, fix it as I go, all directions. I want it nice and thin. Like I told you, if you buy pie crust, those pre-made pie crusts, that's fine, you can do that. But be sure you roll them out a little bit finer. Just put them down and roll them out a little bit more. See how I'm keeping that rolling pin floured up? And I'm just going to keep going until, this is how I determine how big. I want it to be at least an inch larger than my pan. And get it as thin as possible. Because that's what makes a good crust. Nice, thin, blistery crust. Okay, that looks pretty good. It's even all the way around. Now I'm left-handed, so I'm going to flip this way. If you're right-handed, you flip that way. I'm going to take my saran and I'm going to lift the saran wrap. And I'm going to have my pie plate right next to me. And I'm going to flip my crust into my pie plate. And I'm going to move it around with the saran wrap still on there. And then I can peel my saran off. Okay, so remember I said this is the bottom. So it's pretty forgiving. If you have some pieces that fell off, all you do is patch them. Just push them on top, patch them up. Now I should have an overhang on all sides. And I'm gonna leave that overhang because you're gonna see what happens later. So I can patch it. If there's any little pieces around, I can patch it up. But I wanna make sure that I have an overhang all the way around. You see that? I could have even made that a little bit bigger. But that's okay, no one's gonna see it. All right, now I take my apple mixture and I pour my apple mixture into the shell or the bottom crust. All right, that could even be a little higher. I could have even done one more apple, probably. All right, get your sugar, flour, cinnamon mixture all in there. And then you're gonna take 2 tablespoons of butter and you're just going to, this just adds a little richness to this. You're gonna dot it with the butter. Okay. So that is all ready to go. I'm going to put it to the side and I'm going to roll out my next crust. So let me get my rag wet again. I'm going to rinse that out. I don't have to have the countertop completely clean because I'm just going to put saran wrap on top there. I'm just going to push this to the side and I want this to be nice and wet so that saran wrap sticks. Now other people they use a pastry cloth for this. They may use a cover, a socket for their rolling pin, but I don't go to all that trouble. I think it's easier this way. If you've got saran, if you don't put anything under there though, it's very difficult to get your pie crust transferred. So I think this is the easiest way I've found to get my pie crust transferred. So again, I'm gonna put a little bit of flour on my saran wrap. I'm gonna take my top piece. Now, this one's more important, right? Because people are gonna see this one. So, I wanna take my time, make sure my rolling pin has a little bit of flour on there. I'm gonna start in the middle, kind of crush it down, and then use my hand to go in all directions, making this nice and thin. Now with this, you can do a lot of different things. You can make crisscross pattern with lattice, and all you would do for that is cut it into strips and weave it together after you have it rolled out. You could do stencils where you can cut out, if you have small little cookie cutters, you can cut out a design with your cookie cutters. And that makes a nice pretty top. Today we're just gonna do a wash with an egg white just to make it nice and shiny. So we're gonna do that. I'm just patching it up, you saw that? Clean off your rolling pin. This is where you can't panic because it's not working exactly how it's supposed to. Adjust it with your rolling pin, take your time. It should almost be transparent where you can kind of see the counter through it. We want to make it even all directions. There shouldn't be any thick parts and thin parts. Remember I said if a piece picks up with the rolling pin, just push it back together because it really doesn't matter. All right. So, now remember I had that overhang? I'm gonna leave that overhang and you'll see why in a second. Make sure I get this as thin as possible. Okay, it's about the same all sides. Okay, now I'm gonna pick it up like we did before and transfer it on top. Oops, hang on. Transfer it on top. And we're gonna move it around until it's in the center. Okay. Should be hanging over all sides. And then you can pull your saran off. Okay. All right. Success. It's exciting. Okay, now we're gonna cut with a knife about 1 inch all the way around. All the way around, I'm gonna cut about 1 inch. So if the bottom crust is sticking out farther than 1 inch, you're gonna cut the bottom and the top together. All the way around. You can do this with a butter knife. This isn't a very sharp knife, so I'm doing it with that. Okay, now we're going to tuck the 2 pieces in together. Tuck the 2 pieces in together because we don't want any of that apple stuff to leak out. Tuck both pieces in if you want to push it and tuck it in. It's making like a little collar around the top. Tuck it in, you can push them together. Tuck them in just like this. Tuck it in together and push down. tuck it in, and push down. Nothing can be hanging over the side of the pan because all that's going to do is burn. So we're going to tuck it together and fold it in. Tuck it together and fold it in. Tuck it together, fold it in. Both pieces, see, these aren't quite even, but that's okay. We're going to make them work together. Okay, tuck it in, tuck those in, tuck this in. Okay, now I'm going to take my finger and my thumb and I'm going to push it, my fingers and my thumb, and I'm going to push it to make a fluted edge. Now you can do this with a fork. You could do this, you don't have to do it this way. You could just leave it a circle on top, just the pressed in. I just happen to like this little fluting. I think it makes it, and all I'm doing is this. Just makes it a little more festive. I could take these other pieces that I have cut off and I could make cookie cutters out of those, make leaves, add the leaves to the sides. I can do any number of things. You can make it as pretty as you want, or you can make it as rustic and simple as you want. Okay, this one's going to be pretty rustic today. All right, then I'm going to take my egg, and I'm not going to use my egg yolk. I'm just going to use my egg white. Okay, I'm going to take my egg white and I'm going to take a little bit of water in my egg white, and I'm going to mix that up. And I'm going to brush this with my egg white mixture. This is going to give a shiny surface to my pie. My pastry brush, here it is. My pastry brush. I just added a little water to thin that egg out, the egg yolk out, or the egg white out, excuse me. Just gonna make a nice clean. You don't wanna add too much, you don't want it eggy, and that water helps that too. I'm gonna do all around. You can't panic if something goes wrong. It's not a big deal, it's a pie. People are going to eat it. I'm going to make some slits in the middle because this is going to produce lots of steam. So always when you're making flower arrangements and when you're doing food, you always do uneven numbers. So I'm going to do 5 little slits on the top. Okay? I could put a little bit of cinnamon on here to give it some color also. You could do a little cinnamon sugar if you wanted. It's just going to add a little color. Now the last step is making a foil sleeve. So I've taken a piece of foil and I'm going to rip it in half the best I can. And I'm going to make a little sleeve to go on top of my crust. Just the edges. Because the edges are raised, and when you have anything raised, it has a tendency to burn. So I'm going to put this on. This is going to go in the oven for about 50 minutes. So at about 30 minutes, I'll take this off. So I just took it, I split it in half. I'm going to fold it over. Just fold it over. Doesn't have to be pretty, doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm going to put it around the edge of my pie. Now they sell these, you can buy them at the store. They're made out of aluminum. But that's so simple, why would you want to buy anything and have to store it? So I'm just going to cover that raised surface for the first 30 minutes and then I'll take it off. And the last 10 minutes will be without the collar, okay, or without the sleeve. You could call it either thing. All right, there is the apple pie. When it comes out, it should be golden brown and should be delicious. Hope you enjoyed. Why don't you try it? That would be a good thing to do.